Welcome back. In honor of Black History Month, here on Open, we are highlighting work that further supports and analyzes the contributions of Black historical figures. Recognizing Black History Month, professor at Lehman College, Dr. Mark Christian, explores the work of a Black American educator through his latest book, Booker T. Washington, A Life in American History. Dr. Christian, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, can you tell me a little bit about your background and how it actually put you on the path towards exploring African American history through books?
Yes, I'm originally from Liverpool, England. My father is of Jamaican heritage. My mother was Spanish and British citizen of Spanish heritage. And they had 13 children, and I'm number 12. So I come from a very large family. And we are a musical family also. I used to sing with my brothers a cappella. So we were pretty good at singing. We copied the Persuasions, New York a cappella band. And when you follow them, you follow African American history in a broader, deeper sense. So I grew up in a very Black British background, within the context of learning Black American music. That led me to a greater interest in African American culture and history. Last thing, my grandfather actually worked with Marcus Garvey. His name was George Rupert Christian. And my grandparents from Jamaica migrated to Columbus, Ohio. And they're actually buried in Columbus, Ohio in Green Lawn Cemetery.
Wow, that's really interesting. Thank you so
Yes.
much for sharing that. I think it's really cool how we could be from so many different parts of the world, but can be connected through history. So again, thank you for sharing that. Now, speaking of history, for those who aren't familiar, can you give us a brief overview of Booker T. Washington's work?
Well, Booker T. Washington was born in enslavement. I have to do this short because of our time. Yeah, he was born during enslavement in 1856. After he spent his first 9 years of his life under enslavement, and then the family moved, cut a long story short, to Malden in West Virginia. Booker was a very precocious child and had a love of learning. And his mother, although a single mother, and by the way, his father was likely a local white from another plantation area when he was born. That's what biographers have so far found out. Booker struggled for his education tremendously and made a 500-mile trek to a place now it's called Hampton University, but it was Hampton Institute at the time. And there he was disheveled, poverty-ridden. And they welcomed him in, but he worked as a janitor to pay for his studies. And his mentor was General Samuel Chapman Armstrong. He writes about all of this in his autobiography called Up From Slavery. And to cut a long story short, Booker T. Washington was quite brilliant as a student and became a teacher himself. And this is the part where he becomes really famous is when he takes over, builds up Tuskegee Institute. But the men, I would say the man behind Tuskegee is often forgotten. His name was Lewis Adams, and he was born in 1842. And he was born into enslavement in Tuskegee, and a great skilled artisan and in harnessing and shoemaking and tinsmith. So Lewis Adams often gets lost in the Booker T. Washington story. So I really had to highlight his contribution. Booker T. built up Tuskegee. There was $2,000 for teacher salaries, but there was no buildings. So it was the community that come together. he lived among the community. It was Lewis Adams who put him up when he came from West Virginia to settle in Tuskegee. So he started in very humble conditions. The land on Tuskegee was formerly a plantation, and he got it together to buy that for $500, and he raised most of the money himself through fundraising. He was a brilliant fundraiser. So to cut a long story short, he built up an institution. He's an institution builder, and a man who had he was very practical in terms of what did African Americans need at that time, and it was jobs and skills in order to survive, you see. So he was very much into industrial vocational work, but there was always liberal arts, and that's what gets lost as well.
So I'm really glad that you pointed that out, because during my research, I understand that this was actually quite a controversial opinion to have back in that time. You know, even knowing that it was quite controversial, was there something you felt people weren't seeing in him? Why did you want to highlight that?
Could you say, why do you think it was controversial?
Okay, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Why do you think it was why do you think his work was considered controversial?
Well, because he's been fossilized in historical interpretation. Most of those writing on Booker T. Washington come out of the W.E.B. Du Bois school of thought. And so they tend to underplay his role in terms of liberal arts. And Booker T, in an essay in The Souls of Black Folk, of Mr. Booker T. Washington and others, it's there in that context that we see the fossilization of Booker T. Washington. But scholars like Ishmael Reed and Harold Cruz have often set the record straight that Booker T. Washington was for industrial and vocational education, because that's what the people needed in his area. That's what African Americans needed for and foremost at that time. However, there was never a disinterest in higher education. Booker T. Washington was a trustee at Howard University and Fisk University. He funneled funds into both of those universities from philanthropic contributions from northern rich folks. So the fossilization comes from a set of scholars that were able to cement his legacy, and he couldn't answer back because he died in 1915 and Du Bois lived on for another 50 years. So it's a very unbalanced interpretation. It's like somebody criticizing you and you can't answer back. It's very, very difficult, you know. And and he was in that scenario. There's another controversy which catapulted him into the national spotlight, and that was the 1895 speech he gave at the Atlanta Exposition, September the 18th, 1895. And he says a lot of things in this speech, but one of the crucial things that come out is in all things purely social, we can be as separate as the fingers, yet one as the hand, in all things essential to mutual progress. Now that 27 words also gets fossilized, and he's supposedly then given up voting rights. He's given up. He's surrendered to segregation, and he's not interested in higher education. This is the problem, I think, that young scholars need to get over. It's that hill, it's that fossilization of Booker T. Washington, which I think is very unfair, you know.
Mm-hmm. So I'm so happy that we're actually having this discussion, and I'm happy that your book is being discussed, especially during an important time like Black History Month, because I think that a lot of people are having an interest and are eager to learn more about Black history. Can you explain why you think that we're seeing this shift lately, if at all?
Well, I believe, from what I can understand from the woke generation, is that this is in relation to Breonna Taylor. I would say particularly George Floyd, the murder, the horrendous visual murder of George Floyd, did send waves of moral interest in trying to improve the situation of African Americans and people of African heritage across the globe. Whether that sustains itself, I'm not sure. I've been woke for 40 odd years, and
Right.
In Black history and culture, we're always struggling to establish ourselves. So it's nice to have this 15 minutes of popularity, if you like. Whether it sustains itself for a long term, we will see. But I'm happy about the young people being interested in Black history and culture. And by the way, because gender is a big issue right now, I would say for young people, if you want to see an equivalent to Booker T. Washington, study Mary McLeod Bethune, because Mary McLeod Bethune also built her own institution and was an advisor to presidents like Booker T. Washington was. The critique of them is that they were in the hands of white people. And I think that's a very superficial critique, because Booker T. Washington, all the funds that he raised either went to Black education, higher and elementary, and building up schools in the South. So it's very easy from the North to criticize somebody who walks gingerly through politics, because this was a very dangerous time for any African American to speak his mind. There are politicians today trying to stop us talking about this kind of history. Now you have to ask yourself.
So sorry, we're really running out of time, but I definitely want to make sure that everyone can definitely know where they can go to find this book. So can you just quickly direct them to where they can actually learn more about this?
Oh, the book itself can be purchased anywhere. You just mark Christian Booker T. Washington, and it will come up in numerous places: Barnes and Noble, Amazon, and the publisher itself, ABC Clio. I think young people will be inspired, of all cultures, but particularly African American and people of African heritage globally, should be looking into Booker T. Washington with a fresh eyes and hopefully fresh mind, and try and stay away from the stereotypes of people, because they're very dangerous.
Doctor, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate having this conversation. We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday.